So tell me, how did you come to be a knife maker?
Well, I did my degree in design and metal, and this was 4 years ago. And as my final project, I had to pick a specific object to design and make. And at the time, jewellery seemed a little bit frivolous, but my parents always carried a pocket knife with them, and I wanted to make a knife for them. So my very first knife I ever made was a folding knife, and in fact it was a set of 3 folding knives, one for me and one for each of my parents. And I approached Sheffield Couteau's Hall and asked whether anybody could teach me how to make them, and they said that there wasn't anybody around. So I took one apart and made it up as I went along, and I basically made 3 knife-shaped objects. And they're not great. I still have them. And then a few years later I found out that one of the old masters was still working and living. So I did the typical thing that you do when you're in your early 20s, and I just arrogantly packed up all my bags and camped on his doorstep and said that I wanted to be his apprentice. And he said he was too old to take on an apprentice, and gave me a whole load of springs and blades and told me to go away and figure it out myself because it wasn't that hard. And all these years later, he's still making. He's now 98, 97. And he has a huge waiting list, and he was saying to me the other day that if he'd taken me on then I'd have been useful to him now, which is entirely possible, but I'd have been making very different stuff. Yeah. So that was how I started making knives.
And what inspires you for your work today?
It's a combination, really. Being based in Sheffield means that there's that huge heritage of knife making and scissor making and tool making, and there still is a lot of information around. So in my heart of hearts, I'm a researcher. I like to go back and find reasons for doing things and why things used to be made that way, finding old pattern books, but then bringing them up to be relevant to me now.
Can you tell us about the gentlewoman?
Well, very often a lot of my work is inspired by stories and how things have changed and developed. And also we think these days that women in knife making is something relatively unusual, but of course when you look at historical records, particularly of Sheffield, women have been involved in knife making all the time. So whether it be in the making of them or making of the objects, or involved in the background. And one of the recent stories that kind of caught my imagination was this changing of women's lifestyles in Victorian times, where gentlewomen who previously wouldn't have been expected to earn a living were then sent out to but their families would have fallen on hard times, and they would work as governesses or seamstresses. And actually looking at the census records, very often they would call themselves seamstresses, but they would be prostitutes. And in Britain we still don't encourage people to carry knives as weapons, but tools of the trade were considered okay then. So these women were sharpening scissors because they were seamstresses, and they had the right to carry scissors, and they would sharpen them and they would carry them in their garter in case they needed protection.
And I think you've got something interesting to show us. Would you like to present?
This is another modern interpretation of a traditional Sheffield piece. What we have here, we have a history of making exhibition grade pieces. And these are quite fascinating because the conditions that workers would have worked in would have been very pragmatic. They'd have only been paid by the number of pieces they could make. They were encouraged to work as fast as possible. They'd have been paid on piecemeal. They wouldn't have got the opportunity very often to have done fun pieces. But particularly when large exhibitions were coming up, the company would ask their workers to do an exhibition piece.
Oh, really?
And this was really a showcase of their skill. at that point. And after the Great Exhibition or whatever they would have been kind of shown at, they would go and be used in shop windows, and again used as the bling that would sell the more normal stuff that everybody would have. So this was designed as an exhibition piece. They have to be fully functional pieces, no matter how kind of spectacular they are, flamboyant they are. And this is a working pair of scissors. Now, very often the scissors would have been filigree or lace, but they'd have been carved from a single piece of steel. And I have a background in textiles and an interest in textiles, and one of my thoughts was, instead of carving it, could I actually make it out of the iron? So this is, well, it's a steel pair of scissors, but it's got iron. This is a lace that has been made out of iron wire. And then the scissors were designed actually to have this protective element, because of course although it's robust, it's still fragile. And then I bound it on with gold wire. And the gold wire is quite interesting because it's very often used on traditional little scissors that are used for embroidery. You know, they'll gold plate them in order to bring them up to that next level of kind of something special. So that is that pair of scissors. And it has the delicacy of it still being quite female and quite light. The thing that I like most about it actually is that I was worried about it being quite flat. So what I did was I wanted to give you something extra, and so I made the edges shiny as your reward for picking it up, so that you then had something that changed as you picked it up. It wasn't just designed as a flat piece.
Yes. And so, would you see this as a tool that could be used? Obviously, it's an exhibition piece, but is it a tool that could be used?
It could. And in fact, one of the things that I like doing is making my scissors specific for a need. And these are specific textile scissors.
Okay.
So they're for cutting fine silks.
Wonderful. Thank you. So my last question is just, what do you think of the show?
I think it's lovely. I've really enjoyed it. It's been, and the environment and the group of people, the other exhibitors, yes, it's just been wonderful.